In the Minchas Osher for Parshas Va'era, in lieu of the fact that the Dalid Lishonos of Geula, namely Votsesi, Vitzalti, V'Ga'alti, V'Lakachti, they're all written here in one pasuk here, two psukim here in Parshas Va'era, and Chazal say that corresponding to the four Lishonos of Geula, we drink the Dalid Kos Salila Pesach. Therefore, we have this essay that's dedicated to the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos. There are many other shitos as to why the number four is significant and why Chazal chose 4 cups of wine, but the most prominent and well-accepted shita is it's keneged the Dal Lashonos of Geula, which may represent the 4 different dimensions of God's protection and his redemption of our forefathers from the Golus of Mitzrayim. The issue of how to define the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos was taken up by 2 brothers in the city of Chaslavich about a century ago, and they are Rav Moshe Soloveitchik and his brother Rav Velvel. He, Rav Moshe, the older brother of the 2, was the Rav in a city called Chaslavich, and Rav Velvel was the Rav in Brisk. However, due to anti-Semitism and the threat of the Russians as they moved in towards Brisk, at that time, the Jews of Brisk moved out, and Rav Velvel found refuge with his brother Rav Moshe in the city of Chaslavich, which was in a different part. It was in White Russia. They were together there for Pesach, and they delved very deeply into the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos. They focused their attention on a Gemara in Perek Arvei Psachim on Daf Kufov. The Gemara there has 2 statements about 2 different scenarios that could come up in the question of how to fulfill Dalid Kosos. One scenario is called Sheson Bevasachas. We'll explain. The other scenario is called Sheson Chai. Bevasachas means that he poured 4 cups of wine and drank them consecutively. Instead of reciting the 4 brachos, each of which is supposed to come before the shtia, the drinking of the kos, and those are the brachos of Kiddush, of Gal Yisrael, of Birkas Hamazon and Hallel. Instead of doing that, he drank 4 cups of wine without the brachos, one after the other. And the Gemara establishes there, again, there's an issue about the girsa in the Gemara, but the girsa that we have and the Rambam has is the following. Yidei yayin yotza, Yidei cherus yotza, Yidei yayin lo yotza. Did I get that right? Let me just go over that one more time. Yidei, one second, just give me a second to make the cheshbon. So sheson b'vas achas is yidei cherus yotza, yidei yayin lo yotza. Then the Gemara has another scenario, which is called yayin chai, which means the concentrated wine without diluting it with, let's say, 3 parts of water to 1 part of concentrated wine. And in that case, where he drank dalid kosos of concentrated wine without diluting it, the Gemara says just the opposite. And that is yidei yayin yotza, yidei cherus lo yotza. Now, what's going on over here? I mean, the Gemara is differentiating in 2 different directions between cherus and dalid kosos. What is the nature of this takana of dalid kosos? On the one hand, cherus means drink wine to demonstrate, because the Gemara says, demonstrate that you're Ben Chorin. That's called Derech Cherus. On the other hand, each one of the Daled Kosos has its own corresponding bracha. And the nafkamina between these two dimensions of the kos for the bracha, again, four respective kosos for four respective brachos, and shtia of derech cherus is whether or not you have to drink from the kos. So, for example, if we talk about the classic case of a koshel bracha on Leil Shabbos, that's kiddush. So one person will recite the kiddush, everyone else will hear the kiddush, and they'll fulfill the mitzvah even without shti. In fact, I'm not even sure that the Makadosh himself has to drink from the wine. Somebody has to drink from the wine, but the purpose of the drinking of the wine is not for the mitzvah of shtia, but rather because the koshel bracha, the bracha itself, genders a kos. And you have to connect, which is called tziruf, between the bracha and the kos, and you do that through shtia. But again, everyone at the table will fulfill his mitzvah of kiddush, of koshel bracha, without drinking from the kos. He'll just be yotze the bracha of kiddush because of Shomei HaKohen, he's listening to the bracha, he has kavanah to be yotze with the bracha, and that's it. Shtia is not really on. The fact that we have a minhag of giving out the wine, a little bit of wine to everyone at the table, that's not mikra din. Maybe that's a hidur mitzvah of some sort, I don't know, it's a minhag. But be that as it may, certainly a yotze the ikr mitzvah of koshel bracha without shtia, just by hearing the bracha. The name koshel bracha tells you the whole story. It's a kos shel bracha. The bracha is the mitzvah. And we have other cases of a koshel bracha. You could have birkas hamazon, and you recite birkas hamazon ala kos. You'll have sheva brachas under the chuppah, for the chas and kala, and you'll have wine, and so forth and so on. Many cases of a koshel bracha. But again, the point is that the emphasis is not on the drinking of the kos, but rather on the bracha itself. And therefore, you could be yotze this kiyum of koshel bracha without drinking from the kos, because the ikar is the bracha. If we apply that to the Daled Kosos on Leila Pesach, what we come up with is four brachos. Each bracha will be recited over a kos, and the main thrust of the mitzvah is to hear the bracha, or recite the bracha if you like, but not the shtia. So that's called Daled Kosos, which means 4 cups of bracha. Then you have derech cherus. There, shtia is critical, because the way that you demonstrate the fact that you have left Mitzrayim, that you've achieved freedom from slavery, is through the drinking of the wine. So that now we can say that the Daled Kosos, and this is what Rav Moshe and Rav Velva came up with together, is a double kiyum. It has 2 dimensions to it. It has the dimension of koshel bracha. Each one of the 4, respectively, is a koshel bracha. This one for kiddush, and this one for magid, the other one for birkas hamazon, the last one for hal. Fine, that's the kiyum of koshel bracha, and it's no different than any koshel bracha. And then on the other hand, we have a special unique dimension to the mitzvah Daled Kosos, which has to do with chayev adam laharos atzmo, and that is he has to demonstrate that he went from cherus through drinking of the wine. Now, there's no such thing as setting up somebody else to drink the wine for you. There's no vicarious drinking of wine. Drinking the wine as a kiyum of derech cherus is a mitzvah shebegufo. There's no shlichus for a mitzvah shebeguf. I can't send you to put on tefillin for me, or to wear tzitzis for me, or to drink the Daled Kosos for me. Each person individually will be required to drink the Daled Kosos from the perspective of Daled Kosos as derech cherus. And now we come to understand the 2 scenarios and the 2 piskei dinim that we mentioned at the outset. First of all, we spoke about Sheson b'vas achas. He drank 1 cup after the other, shelo seder brachos. Obviously, he forfeits the mitzvah of koshel bracha, but on the other hand, he does achieve the mitzvah of Daled Kosos derech cherus. He drank 4 cups of wine in order to demonstrate that he's a ben chorin. Now let's take the other scenario. What about the case of Sheson chai? He drinks wine that is concentrated. It's not diluted. very difficult to get it down the system. It's, you can get a stack of bellyache from drinking yain chai. And here the Gemara says just the opposite, that Yidei Cheres lo yatsa, because a Ben Chorin doesn't drink yain chai, but on the other hand, Yidei Dalid Kosos yatsa, meaning that a yain chai is kosher and is valid for any kosher bracha. And that has repercussions as far as Birkas Hamazon, as far as Sheva Brachas or Heshechiyonu. Whenever you make a bracha, Havdalah, for example, Motzi Shabbos, you could have Havdalah over Yain Chai, because Yain Chai is Yain. It does have a Chal Shem Yain. It doesn't enjoy, you don't enjoy the Derech Cheres aspect, but you do have the basic mitzvah of Dalid Kosa Shel Bracha. So again, just to summarize, our final conclusion is that Dalid Kosos is not a simple mitzvah, it's a complex mitzvah, compound mitzvah. It has two dimensions to it. On the one hand, it's a kosher bracha. Each one of the Dalid Kosos has its bracha, its unique bracha. And on the other hand, it's a mitzvah of drinking Dalid Kosos derech cherus, to the extent to which the number 4 might be very significant. And there are poskim who say that it's 4 or bust. And if you have less than 4 kosos, you're not yotze the mitzvah of Dalid kosos. I'm not sure that we paskin like that, but you should know, just keep it out there, because it means that the Dalid kosos form one entity, and they're just individual segments of one greater mitzvah. And the greater mitzvah is to drink Dalid kosos and not less than Dalid, which corresponds to the 4 dimensions of Geula, because each dimension of Geula adds something to the total whole, to the total picture of Geula. And therefore you need 4. Less than 4 just won't do. It's like, somebody who believes in 12 out of the 13 Yesodos Emunah. That's not too good. It's not worth much, And I wonder what would be, the status of Asura, of the Aseres Hadivros if you only took 9 out of 10, So sometimes, in Sfiras Omer, you have the famous question about if he left out a day. Is it one entity? And the number is very significant. But getting back to our issue, we now come to the conclusion that you have to achieve both goals. You have to achieve the goal of koshel bracha. For that, you only have to listen to the Mavarech, and you yotze through his bracha, and you don't need shtia. Shtia is a separate halacha in Dalid Kosos because of derech cherus, and you have to drink the wine. Okay, having said all that, I would like to refer you to the second page here in the Minchas Osher. And again, thanks to David as always for sending this out. And on the column on the right, he mentions the Gemara in Psachim, in the paragraph that starts with Ukfar, Nodav, etc. And im Nosnin Kos Lifnei Kol Echad Vechad Lifnei Bais. He quotes a Tosfos. The Tosfos, at the beginning of Arvei Psachim, is bothered by the Lashon of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, as far as the Tamchui is concerned, which the best translation I give that is like a soup kitchen. That's for basic, people don't have enough for 2 seudos. You give out stock. And there you take from the Tamchui for Lela Pesach, v'lo yifchesu lo mi arba kosos. Not to give him or supply him with less than 4 kosos. Why him? What's the singular here? It should have said lahem, because there are many people sitting at the Seder table. You have your whole family there. Each one of them wants Dalid kosos. Is there anybody home? At least one person is here. Bruce is here. The rest are just pictures or names. Oh, I see. Bobby's here. Very nice. So now I don't know where David Taub is, but we heard that he might be joining us. Oh, there's David. How are you, David? Haven't seen you in ages, so it's good to see your face. Wow. So anyway, getting back to the point of the Gemara in Psachim, the Gemara is telling us, and this is a very fundamental point, that we have to guarantee that he, in the singular, gets 4 cups of wine, this poor person. And Tosfos points out that the singular lo yifchesu lo, him, implies that we don't have to worry about the other people sitting at the Seder table. He may have a family of 10 members, and plus he has another 10 guests. We don't have to supply them with Daled Kosos. We only have to supply him, only him in singular. And Tosas equates it with Kiddush, just like in Kiddush, only one person will drink from the kos, according to the strict letter of the law. And there's no need for anyone else to drink. It's Tosas assuming that by postulating an analogy between Daled Kosos and Kiddush, that Daled Kosos like Kiddush is a koshel bracha. If it's a koshel bracha, one person has to drink from the kos, but the other people just hear the bracha and they yotze with the bracha. And this is appella because Tosas is completely omitting the shtia derech cherus. Why did he do so? And that's what the Minchas Osher points out. Tosas was very well aware of the fact that there's a mitzvah of shtias hakos, and you have not fulfilled your obligation of Daled Kosos by simply hearing the brachos and being yotze vicariously through the Makadish drinking the wine. No. You have to drink the wine yourself. Derech Cheres requires of it. Nervous. The Gemara wants to know that we have halacha that tamchui is only designated for like life or death situations. We don't give out money from the tamchui just like this. So what Tosas is vacillating about is what's the Iker mitzvah of Daled Kosos? Can we salvage at least the main mitzvah by giving out the minimum amount of wine that's possible and not depleting the tamchui of its funds? So therefore, Tosas wants to say that maybe the main mitzvah is the kos shel bracha. The Rabbanan had 4 kosos shel bracha. And then, as kind of like, jumping on the bandwagon, getting a tremp, as we say here in Israel, they added another dimension of shtia, of cherus. But Tosas thinks, in the Havamin at least, that the main thrust and the primary aspect of Daled Kosos, as established by the Chacham, are the 4 brachos. And therefore, Tosas says, you know what? We're going to go with kos shel bracha, and therefore we're going to spare the tamchui of having to deplete its funds by giving out Daled Kosos to every member of the family who's sitting there at the table, and they'll be yotzei the kos shel bracha. They won't get the additional, which is a secondary kiyum of shtias Daled Kosos derech cherus. But Tosas l'maskana comes to the conclusion, no, let's not accept that diuk in the Mishnah Lo. It should say lahem, and really, we have to guarantee that every single member of the family sitting at the table, the men, the women, maybe even the children, have to be given Daled Kosos shel yayin because they have to drink the wine. And shtias hakos derech cherus is the iker takana. The main primary takana that the Chacham made was shtias arba kosos keneged arba l'shon shagul. What they did afterwards, as sort of like a tag on, is in the aftermath of having this mitzvah of shtias Daled Kosos, they added kos shel bracha. And they decided that since we have the Daled Kosos that you have to drink, and that's derech cherus, and on top of it, it happens to be that if we calculate the brachos on the night of Seder, we have 4. Each one deserves a kos. So we'll attach it as a secondary kiyum of kos shel bracha. But the primary fundamental kiyum is the shtias Daled Kosos. Therefore, we have to guarantee, even if it means taking funds out of the tamchui, that every member of the family will be supplied with Daled Kosos for the shtia derech cherus. Now, if you take a look at the left column, he points out that the fundamental issue of shtia is brought to light by the Rambam, because the Rambam speaks about the fact that when he's eating his meal on this night, he has to drink derech cherus. And therefore, kol echad v'echad, bein anoshim, bein noshim, chayav lishtos bolel zeh arba kos shel yain. Ein poksameh. The Rambam is outspoken about the fact that the mitzvah is shtias Daled Kosos, and the Rambam adds that the derech cherus is enhanced by the fact that you need heseba. So you do heseba during the drinking of the Daled Kosos, and that gives the shtia an elevated kiyum of derech cherus. But there's no question about the Rambam. The Rambam sees the fundamental mitzvah of Daled Kosos as demonstrating cherus. And the Rambam puts it together with chayav adam laharas atzmo. Now, if you take a look on page tzadi, which would be the last of the, I think, in the booklet that I hope you have, or Maybe you have more than those pages, but at least in that. So he says that Iker Takonis Daled Kosos, you might have argued that again, this is like the Tosa and the Havamina, that the fundamental push for the Takon of Daled Kosos was to enhance the mitzvos of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas HaAgoda, Kriyas HaHalel, and therefore it's enough if you hear the brachos. However, again, L'maskona, Tosas rejects this idea and requires that everyone drink from their kos. And therefore the Tamchi has to supply everyone with Daled Kosos. Now, Rabbosai, take a look at this. He says the following, that if the Iker mitzvah now becomes Shtiyas Daled Kosos, and the brachos are sort of, shall we say, the tag along, then the shevach of these 4 brachos is enhanced by the yayin. And any yayin might do. As we said before, could be yayin chai, would be enough for the bracha to be chal on the yayin. The heseba now becomes very critical to the Daled Kosos, because if you are establishing Daled Kosos with shtia, derech cherus, then you want to get heseba in there, because without heseba, it's not really derech cherus. But now comes the main question. What's the status of Chamar Medina with regard to Daled Kosos? And if you're sharp about this, and you know that Chamar Medina is sufficient for a koshel bracha, and you don't need yayin. Now, I don't know exactly in America what would qualify as Chamar Medina. When I was a kid, they talked about Coca-Cola. I don't know. When I was in Cape Town, it was squeezed strawberries. Wow. I still remember there was a hechsher in Cape Town for strawberry juice. It was the tastiest thing in the world, and it was dirt cheap. Anyway, whatever Chamar Medina is, it's sufficient for a koshel bracha. And you can be yotze a koshel bracha with Chamar Medina. And now here comes the question. What happens if we only have Daled Kosos Shel Yayin for one person at the table? Should we supply everyone else at the table with at least Chamar Medina? We don't have enough Daled Kosos to go around for everyone. So the Mekadesh and the Mavarech he's going to make the bracha and drink the wine. So we have one set of Daled Kosos, of Yayin. What about the other people? Should we supply them with Chamar Medina and guarantee that each one of them will have 4 cups of Chamar Medina? Back in the old day in Europe, they had Ruzhinka wine. They had raisin wine. That was Chamar Medina. It was a big thing to make, soak the raisins, and the drink was considered like Chamar Medina. So this was a discussion between, again, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik and his brother Reb Velvel on that Pesach, where they spent together the Pesach in Chaslavich. And as I said, there was a dearth of yayin. They were only able to secure yayin 4 cups for everyone at the table. And now the question was, should we supply everyone else at the table with Chamar Medina? Because there are more paskins in Shulchan Aruch that if there's no yayin, then take Chamar Medina. So Rav Moshe and Rav Velvel together worked on this sugya. And again, I have a different Masorah than what you'll see here in the Minchas Osher. There was no machlokas here between Rav Moshe and Rav Velvel. They both came to the same conclusion. There's absolutely no point to supplying the other people at the table with Chamar Medina. You gain absolutely nothing. Dinada. Why? Because if you're talking about derech cherus and the kiyum of shtia, which might in fact be the iker mitzvah Daled Kosos, well, giving them Ruzhinka wine is not going to be qualify as a kiyum of derech cherus. You need yayin, not Chamar Medina. Ella, what you want to supply them with Chamar Medina because of the other dimension, the other aspect of Dalit Kosos, namely Kosos Shel Bracha. And you can recite a Kosos Shel Bracha over Chamar Medina. But the answer is, I don't need that. They were Yotzei, the kiyum of Kosos Shel Bracha by listening to the Makadesh, the Mavarech, right? Makadesh is the first kos and then the rest and Shomea Kaona. So what do you gain by giving them Chamar Medina? You gain absolutely nothing. Chamar Medina would be meaningful if you had no wine and you had no, you had nothing but Chamar Medina. But here, you could be Yotze, your Kiyum of Koshel Brach by listening to the Mavarech, and that's it. And therefore they came to the conclusion that there was no point to supplying the members of the family with Chamar Medina. Very, very fascinating. Now, if you happen to have access to 2 pages that David sent in the email from Nefesh Harav, then take a look for a moment on the second page of the two in Kuf Pei Vav. And he introduces that Rav Moshe Soloveitchik used to get 2 sorts of questions before Pesach. Classic. Number one, they found that there was a little bit of chametz mixed in. That's called a mashahu. And the question was, we have to throw out the whole taromas. And the second question that was quite common was people who fell asleep in the middle of the Seudah. I'm not saying it was the Balas Abayis, but maybe it was. But it could be anybody at the Seudah fell asleep. And the question is, when he wakes up, maybe immediately he should eat his afikomen. It's getting very late, and the afikomen has to be eaten, in some sort of conjunction with the Suda. If he fell asleep, then I don't know if he could continue eating the Suda. He might have to recite Birkas Hamazon. And if that be the case, he should eat his afikomen immediately. However, on one particular Pesach, there was a totally different question that was asked. The second of the 4 cups of wine, as you know, is the kos of Magid. And you recite Haggadah. You start with Manishtana, and then you go on to Avodah Mayinu, and then you have, a whole discussion about the Makos and Tzach V'Adash Ravav, and then you have, how many Nisim, whether are there, and the Kriyas Yamsuf, and so forth and so on, until you finally get to the end of Magid with the Brach of Gal Yisrael. What happened was that in the middle of Magid, the cup spilled. Nishpach HaKos. So again, we're on the second of the 4 cups of wine, and he's midway through the Magid, and it spills. So here's the question. Does he have to go back to the beginning of Magid, start again from Avodah Mayinu L'Far Mitzrayim, maybe even from the Fir Kashas? Because it's not enough that he recites the brach at the end of Magid over Kos Yayin, but rather the takana was that the entire Magid should be recited over the cup, concluding with or culminating with the Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. But we need that the kos was used for the entire Magid, and then he has to go back to the beginning of Avodah Mayinu. People are getting antsy, you know what I mean? Or do we say no? It's sufficient if he has the kos shniya by the time he gets to the end of Magid and he's ready for the bracha of Gal Yisrael. And Rav Moshe at this point was inclined to be machmir, and he said, even though we don't really hold the second kos for the whole of Magid, I try to do that. It's not easy. Magid is very long. But be that as it may, the kos is there on the table, and the entire Magid is recited and related to the kos. And therefore, Rav Moshe's conclusion was that the entire Magid has to be recited on that kos. If he takes a different kos, just to recite the end of Magid and the bracha at the end, that's not sufficient. You need the entire Magid to be chal on the kos. So therefore, he has to go back to the beginning. But here, Rav Moshe said we could be mekil, and we don't have to force him to recite the entire Haggadah, the whole Magid again, but rather we'll rely on what I call, again, this is not Rav Moshe's language, the abridged edition of the Haggadah. Where do I find the abridged edition of the Haggadah, not from the National Council of Conservative Judaism. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Rambam's Girsa in the Nusach of Magid at the end of Hilchas Chametz Umatzah. And believe it or not, the Rambam cuts out a lot of what we say in Magid. Like, for example, the entire section about how many Nisim took place, at Yam Suf and so forth and so on. Was it 250? Was it 980? How many were there? That, says Rabosha, is a later addition to the Haggadah. That's not the bare bones addition to Haggadah. And therefore, Rabosha said, you know what? Fill up a kos, because your second kos is already spilled. Start with Avadim Hayinu. Leave out the fair kashes. And not only that, just get up to Ditzach, Adash, V'achav. Say Rabbi Gamliel, right? And get to the bracha of Gal Yisrael. That's it. So Rav Moshe gave him an eitzah to just simply truncate the Haggadah so that he would have a new cup of wine with a shorter edition of Mag. Now, as far as Heseba is concerned, it's very interesting because the halacha requires Heseba in Shtiyas Dalid Kosos. So, in a sense, what upgrades the Dalid Kosos to the level of Cherus is twofold. Number one, it's the Yayin, and again, not Yayin Chai, and also the Heseba, the fact that he reclines. That, shall I say, upgrades the Yayin and the Shtia to Derech Cherus. Now, if he drinks the wine without Heseba, then l'chatchila we require him to drink another cup of wine. I mean, by now his head is like spinning, if you know what I mean. Because Heseba is really quite important. Now, the Gemara tells us about Talmidim that were at the Seder table of their Rebbe. Amongst them was none other than Abaye. Abaye himself was at the Seder table. And Abaye describes how they did Heseba. And they didn't have chairs like armchairs the way we have, that you do Heseba over the arm or the chair, whatever. But rather they each leaned on the knee of the Talmud who was next to him. Could you imagine? Leaning on the knee. I tried that once for Tachnun, and it didn't help me very much. I got a jab. Anyway, but the Rav Yosef, when he heard about this Abaye, that Abaye told him what the students did, he said, you didn't have to do Heseba at all, because a Talmud at the Seder table of his Rebbe does not do Heseba. It's not appropriate to do Heseba. So Rav Soloveitchik points out that the reason why they leaned on each one's knee, even though Rav Yosef held they didn't have to do that, but Abaye was representing that group of Talmidim that felt that even at their Rebbe's Seder table they should be doing Heseba. Maybe the Rebbe is mochel on his cover, but they had to lean. So we call Heseba leaning. But you might misunderstand the word leaning. For example, if you could see what I'm doing now, is this called leaning? No, that's not leaning. Leaning means that the arm is being held up by something, right? Your arm, your zroa, is being held up. And therefore, if they couldn't do any other sort of Heseba, they would lean on one of the other's knee. And that knee would give them, so to speak, the support. So it's called reclining. It's called Heseba. And it's interesting, the Rav had a drush on this. And he said that when the Gemara tries to figure out what is the relationship between a Talmud and a Rebbe, and whether a Talmud should do Heseba or not, so the Gemara comes to the conclusion that according to everyone, even Rav Yosef, there is a category of a Talmud Yisrael Rabbah that requires Heseba, and that's called Shulia de Nagri. What's Shulia de Nagri? He was an apprentice that was learning how to do carpentry, and carpenter in Hebrew is Nagar. And guess what? even though he's a Talmud Eitzel Rabbo, because he's learning from his Rebbe, nevertheless, he's only learning how to be a Nagar. And therefore, he should go ahead and do a say. But he doesn't have the same kind of Yira and Kavod to a Rebbe in a normal Talmud Rebbe relationship where the Talmud learned most of what he knows in Torah from his Rebbe. So Rav Soloveitchik, in a very cute comment, wanted to darshan that there are two types of Talmidim. Because keep in mind, even the Shulya Dinagri is called by the Gemara Talmud Eitzel Rabba. What kind of Talmud Eitzel Rabba? All he learned is the motions as to how to, how to knock a nail into a piece of wood. But the answer is that there are two types of Talmidim. Some Talmidim, they watch the Rebbe and they try to figure out, when does the Rebbe do this? When does he stand up? When does he drink his coffee? They're interested in his politics. You know what I mean? They don't really hear his Torah. They don't imbibe his Torah learning. They could tell you, on any given time what he said about, I don't know what. So they tell stories about the Rebbe. That's the Shulya Dinagri. The real Talmud is not interested in when the Rebbe picks up his left finger or his right arm. They're interested in hearing the Torah and absorbing the Torah of the Rebbe. That's a true Talmud. So therefore, when it comes to a true Talmud, he has to respect his Rebbe who's giving him Olam Haba, and therefore he doesn't do a Seder. But if he's a Shulya Dinagri, and all he cares about is how the Rebbe, knocks a nail into the wood, that's not a real Talmud relationship to his Rebbe. Okay. Now, in the final few minutes here, in our discussion, that is, as we said at the outset, dedicated to Tserel Bas Avram, we're going to talk about the following question. And this you'll find on page Kuf Pei He in the Nefesh Harav. Now, by way of introduction, the Rambam has a very unique shita in the 29th parak of Shabbos regarding Kiddush and what wine qualifies and is valid for the mitzvah of Kiddush. Not all wines will qualify. The Rambam, based on a sugya in Baba Basra, assumes an analogy between two mitzvahs of yayin. Number one, Nisuch HaYayin, which was the libations of the wine that accompanied the korbanos, and the yayin of Kiddush. Now, based on this hekesh, this equation, this analogy, the Rambam paskins that there are two categories of wine that have to be disqualified for Kiddush. And why? Because they're disqualified for yayin lemizbeach, for yayin nisuch. One of them is called kanditon, which means a wine where they add sugar, sweet wine where they add sugar. And the other is yayin mevushal. Now, just on the side, most of our dry wines today are not mevushal. I can't promise you that's true 100%, but 99%. Kaniton, which by the way is a word that's used even in modern Hebrew today in Israel, is yayin that has an add mixture of sugar. Let's say a sweet wine, not a dry wine. Certainly grape juice would fit into that category. And yayin mevushal means that they used to pasteurize after they, in the wine press, after they pressed all the grapes and they got the juice, then they used to put it to heat and they pasteurized it, and that becomes yayin mevushal. And our dry wines are usually dry, number one, meaning there's no addition of sugar, and it's not mevushal. But again, there are exceptions to every one. So the Rambam would say that if you have yayin mevushal, yayin shel kanditon, you can't use it for kiddush. Now, the first of the Daled Kosos is the kos of kiddush. So if you want to be yotzei kiddush as the first of the Daled Kosos, and you want to be machmir like the Rambam shita, and the first kos is a kos shel bracha of the bracha of kiddush, then you're going to have to exclude yayin kanditon and yayin mevushal. Now the question is, okay, let's say that you have the right wine for Kiddush, for the first of Daled Kosos, according to the Rambam Shita. It's not mevushal, no added sugar, it's not kanditon, everything's perfect. What about the other people at the Seder? Do they also have to be machmir like the Rambam Shita? And that means that they cannot use for Kiddush, Yain Mevushal, or Yain Shel Kanditon, or do we say no? As far as the other people at the Kiddush at the table, they need Dalit Kosos Derech. And the fact that the wine is cooked or the wine has an add mixture of sugar, that doesn't remove the Derech. You've got the Derech. On the contrary, one would argue maybe you enhance the Derech. If you don't like dry wine, you want to get sweet wine. So at first glance, the answer should be pashut. There's no need for the other members of the family to be machmir. Let them have yain mevushal. Let them have yain shel kaditon. Because all they need is shtia derech. As far as koshel bracha is concerned, they were yotze with the makadesh. He had the right wine according to the Rambam. Narvas, they need shtia. Let them do shtia on any wine that's tasty, that's good. Comes along Rav Moshe and he says, no, not enough. It could be enough for the other 3 cups of wine, but not for the first. Because the mitzvah shtia of the first cup of wine is to drink a kosher kiddush. According to the Rambam, yain kanditon or yain mevushal is not a kosher kiddush. It doesn't qualify. It's not royal mizbeach, and therefore it's not royal kiddush. So it's not enough that you take out a bottle, from there and you drink it. And it's a wonderful sweet wine. No, that's not enough. You have to drink a yain shel kiddush. In other words, the 2 dimensions of Dalid Kosos have to overlap. You've got to have both the koshel bracha, and on that koshel bracha, you have a mitzvah shtia derech. But that kos in the first kos according to Rambam could not qualify as a koshel bracha unless it is yain she'edam avushal, yain without any admixture of sugar. Okay, then we'll stop here, and we wish nechama to Bruce, and you should only hear from Simchas, should be an aliyas neshama, and thanks everyone for joining.